Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. This is Dr. Andrew Rimby, and I am joined with a really exciting writer guest. So, all you writers out there, I'm giving you what you want. Everyone loves when I have the literature episodes. So, I know that this guest, he, first of all, has just been so kind and generous and really sweet in an email, listening to other podcast episodes. So, I'll shout out Nigel Featherstone, Zachary Zane. Maybe he'll bring up others that he's listened to. But I'm joined here with a really talented writer. His name is Lucian Childs. Lucian was a Peter Taylor Fellow at the Kenyon Review Writers Workshop. There we go. A recipient of the Rasmussen Foundation Individual Artist Project Award and a finalist for the Faulkner Wisdom Short Story Award. He has been an artist in residence at Birdcliff Art Colony in Woodstock, New York, and at Artscape Gibraltar Point on the Toronto Islands. He holds bachelor degrees in two subjects, English from Southern Methodist University and architecture from the University of Texas at Austin. Before I discuss the book that we're really going to be diving into, his debut work, he was a contributing editor of the 2017 Lambda Literary finalist. Love Lambda Literary, especially when I had Alexander Sanchez on, who wrote Rainbow Boys. I remember a lot of Alexander's work has been a Lambda Literary finalist. Okay, so that's a rabbit hole detour. But he was a contributing editor of Building Fires in the Snow, a collection of Alaska LGBTQ short fiction and poetry. His stories and book reviews have appeared in literary journals like Rain, oh, I like that title, The Puritan, Sanskrit, Plenitude, and Prairie Fire, among others. He was born and raised in Dallas, Texas, but he's lived in Austin, San Francisco, Anchorage, and he currently is coming to us from Toronto, Ontario. So, without further ado, I'm here with Lucian, who's here to talk about his debut work, Dreaming Home, written in 2023. So, welcome, Lucian.
Hey, Andrew, thanks very much for having me on. That's quite the intro there. I'm going to have to see if I can live up to all that.
Well, I always love reading someone's bio because it really gives you that snapshot of all their accomplishments. And when you're listening to all of those accolades, I know even myself, when I'm on a show and I hear someone read my bio, I'm thinking, wait, I did that? Or
Yeah.
it's
Who is
interesting
that
because
guy?
we're so in our day-to-day lives. But I think I have to first just start with the exciting discussion we had before I hit the record button, which is all of these places you've lived, um, and the studies that you've done in English and architecture. How did your studies also speak to you traveling around? Like, are they related or, not necessarily? It seems like you're a very nomadic person.
Well, I've lived in a lot of places, but you have to remember I'm old. So I'm kind of a weird bird out here in the literary scene because I this is my debut novel at the age of 74. So I don't know if I ever get a record or a gold star for doing that. I'm not really sure which, but so I think one of the advantages or about being an older writer is you have a lot of experience to pull from, I spent decades in many of these places. I lived in Anchorage for 25 years. San Francisco was like 12 years. Grew 26 years in Dallas. So it seems like I moved around a lot, but it it hasn't been that much really. So in terms of like how being in those places has affected me as a writer, well, I think everything you do kind of affects who you are, and that affects how who you are also as a writer. But for sure, Texas and in San Francisco, you're in this book, Dreaming Home, both figure really, really strongly, and Kyle, the main character in the book, is, I guess, in some ways, kind of a stand-in for me. He was like an unhappy queer kid living in Texas, and he, he grew up in Killeen on a at an army base, Fort Hood, a really big army base. I grew up completely different, sort of upper middle class, Dallas, suburban lifestyle. But yeah, we both had to be like deeply hidden as queer people at that time. And so it wasn't until I moved to Austin in the 70s where, things started like opening up for me because Austin was, I mean, it still is, right? This incredibly lively and accepting place. Their motto is keep Austin weird. And part of being weird is also being queer. And so that's where I finally kind of, was able to, spread my wings a little bit and finally come out. Um, but I guess the thing about Texas at that time, I don't know what it's like now, really, but gay life was still pretty under the radar there, and I really wanted to be in some place that was more open and also more diverse. I wanted to live in some place where everybody didn't look like me, and it was even weirder than Austin. So I ended up going like Kyle does in the book. I ended up running away from Texas and living in San Francisco for 11 years, and I was an English major in Dallas at SMU, but I kind of set that aside for a long time. And curiously, when I was in San Francisco, that was during the Violet Quill and the explosion of gay literature that was happening in the late 70s and 80s with people like Andrew Holland and Edmund White, and I just like soaked all that stuff up, like Dancer from the Dance and a boy's own story, A Beautiful Room Is Empty. Those authors really have a elevated sense of language, and that really influenced me as well, because that's kind of a mark of my stuff as well. Uh, so yeah, and then Alaska. I don't know. I ended up in Alaska because of a man. It's an old story, but it's a good one. And curiously enough, it has a really, really vibrant literary scene. So I sort of incubated as a writer there with lots of workshops and critique groups, and finally followed yet another man to Toronto, and where I am now. And so it's been kind of a crazy journey, but a really interesting one.
Well, so did you find that Anchorage, um, the nature? I always hear of just the beauty of Alaska's nature. Like, did you feel that it was a very hermit lifestyle in Alaska? Because my own sense of Alaska is that the cold or the certain seasonal weather can really make you um kind of closet yourself off. Kind of how I imagine Seattle with the rain. But I'm sure, like you said, there's also a really creative vibrancy. I'm just curious, like how so in Alaska was that
Yeah, Anchorage is the main city where most people live, and it's really kind of not what you think. And that was one of the things we really brought out in that anthology, and was a finalist for the Lambda Literary Award in 2017. We wanted to show urban Alaska. We wanted to say that, hey, drinking a martini out on the deck and listening to, I don't know, house music, that's an Alaskan activity too, right? It's the literature there does tend to be about place and environment and nature, and there's a lot of memoir, and so we want to kind of counteract that by talking about urban Alaska. So, uh, especially in the wintertime when it can be very dreary because the days are short and the sun is very anemic, right? But that's also the time when the arts community is like off the hook there. There's a lot of theater. We have amazing, huge, world-class museum there, lots of activity there. So Anchorage is actually a little buzzing, little artistic and creative hub, and very much so in the literary community. There are a lot of really great writers that have come out of there, and that like myself who no longer live there, but and many who do still do. So it's not what you think, Andrew. Go up
Yeah.
there and go to Bernie's and hang out on the deck and drink a lemon drop, and you'll be a real Alaskan too.
Yeah, Anchorage, I'll have to investigate more into it. But I have been to San Francisco, and I find that when it comes to people thinking in the public about queer community and LGBTQ lifestyle, culture, they think of San Francisco. Like that kind of
Right,
has become just the
right.
bastion of where the queer community congregates. So, what I'm curious about is you were there for 11 years. What were the upsides of San Francisco and what were
Mm,
maybe some of the obstacles in San Francisco? Because I do
yeah,
visiting for a short time, I had my own like pros that I really liked, and there were some, it was just a different type of city than my experience of a Northeastern. Easterner of Philadelphia and New York City. It's like similar, but also Californian in its style, which
yeah.
I like the California style, but I'm curious your thoughts on it.
Well, this book in a lot of ways is really an homage to my time in San Francisco, and so I got there in '82 and left in '92, and I think the book is a little bit shifted a little bit, later than that, but it was like for me as a guy coming from Texas, to be in this gay city, really. I mean, I lived in the Castro a couple of times. Basically lived every place I lived was like around or very close to the Castro, and I just never had experienced that kind of freedom and just being able to kiss your friends in the street and hold hands. And it was just, everyone was gay, except for during my work life, which was downtown in architecture firms. And um, so I kind of want to capture that in the book. But of course, it was also, I got there right at the height of the party before AIDS had hit. So, huge circuit parties and going to the clubs and the bars and the bathhouses and stuff like that. It was really a heady time. But then, of course, it all came kind of crashing down about 3 years after I got there when AIDS started happening. And so, there had to be a lot of AIDS, even though AIDS isn't really the subject of my book. It's not really an AIDS novel. I mean, if you're going to talk about San Francisco at that time, you really got to talk about that too. And so, in terms of the pluses and the minuses of the city, I mean, there's so many pluses. I mean, just geographically, I mean, where it is, out there in the middle of the bay, and the fog, the weather it plays a big part in this book, the fog especially, and um, I don't know. For me, I just, began to kind of gravitate away from that kind of more public gay life, as I began to get older, right? The being in the bars and doing all that stuff held less of a kind of a fascination for me. And I began to feel um, that maybe I wasn't quite gay enough for San Francisco. And uh, so I kind of when I met Paul, my husband, who lived in Alaska, I kind of jumped at the chance to have this different kind of life, one that was still urban, but that was really close to nature. I mean, we could be sitting in the kitchen, and then 15 minutes later, you're in complete wilderness. It's that close.
Wow. Well, and even though I love the whole lemon drop invitation, I don't drink, but I don't drink for fitness reasons and health reasons, but I love my mocktails. So I'll still take you up on that Anchorage mocktail cocktail at Bernie's, I think is what you said the place is.
Right.
Um, so but San Francisco, you were there, like you've said, during such a tumultuous time of the AIDS pandemic and just like feeling that loss as a community. I mean, how do you reflect back on, especially me not being born until 1992 and not knowing what
Right,
it was like for AIDS to really be a death sentence. You know, when I grew up, there was medication, and
right,
now I'm on PrEP. So it's a
right,
very different time. I actually feel like we've kind of entered my generation back into like the disco 1970s. It has that feeling right now.
right,
Um, so you remember both sides of the coin. And
right.
was there a sense of, because this connects to your book, was there a sense of the nostalgia from the 70s and those party filled days, but even just the dancing that people, that the gay men, especially gay men, were still trying to cultivate even though AIDS was around? Was there a forgetting, like trying to pretend it didn't exist, almost like those who pretend that the COVID pandemic didn't happen?
For sure, there was a lot of that going on. I know at one point there was this big battle over the bathhouses. The health department wanted to close the bathhouses down because they felt that they were incubators of AIDS. And for gay men who had struggled for decades, to finally be able to freely express their sexuality, this was like a hard pill to swallow, and it was quite controversial for a long time, and there were protests around it, and um, uh, finally they did end up closing the bathhouses, and then later opening them in a modified form. So yeah, there was for sure that kind of backlash against AIDS. But then there was also like ACT UP was very active at that time, and they would be having die-ins at the corner of 17th and Market, where people would lay down and they chalk their outlines on the street, and or they have disruptions in the opera and stuff like that. So there were big marches, down to City Hall, candlelight marches, and so there's a real feeling of solidarity around AIDS that happened in that time. The women's community really kicked in and became like there was a real separation between the men's and women's community before that, but the women's community really rose to the occasion and became central players in the fight for AIDS services and volunteerism that became so central to the response to AIDS in San Francisco.
Well, and something that you really explore in Dreaming Home is um you look a lot at youth and you look a lot at homelessness, and there's so many panic stories right now about San Francisco and the housing crisis. I mean, I was there recently, and there is a crisis. I can't deny it. But there's a crisis in New York. I think a lot of cities right now just are
Yes.
having, these are economic fallout times of distress in all of the metropolitan areas, but just in our world. Um, so I wonder, when it comes to queer youth, do you think that they now are more seen and thankfully are not being thrown out of their homes? Is there more of an acceptance you feel now? Like, no matter whether you're in San Francisco, Dallas, Toronto, because of how our times have changed?
Well, I am certainly no expert in this field, but I had to do I had to do a lot of it's fiction, but it's fiction that's grounded in reality. So I had to do a lot of research for all the aspects of this book, especially the chapter on the conversion therapy, which I don't have any direct experience with. But there are still it's still an issue. I mean, you would think that it isn't, but according to my research, I'm just looking at my little study guide now online. There's 42 million youth are homeless annually, and 40% of those identify as LGBTQ plus. I mean, that is a lot of kids. And so a lot of kids are still being thrown out of their houses by their families when they come out or they get caught being gay. And there's a lot of organizations in San Francisco, like the Trevor Project, the Larkin Street Youth Services, that are have been in place since the time I was there to try to uh, help these kids. So I'd like to say you're correct that it's a lot better than it used to be, and maybe it is, but there's still a lot of queer kids out there who are falling through the cracks even today. And so, I mean, even though Kyle is a little bit older in Dreaming Home when he's living in his car, um, he does like run away right after high school when he's like 18, and he lives in his car for a time in Houston. So so yeah, it's better, but it's still happening, just like conversion therapy is still happening. I know when I workshop that chapter at a writing class in what was then called Ryerson University in Toronto, they thought it was science fiction. They thought I was making it up. And I'm like, conversion therapy is still a very much happening out there. I mean, Canada didn't outlaw it until 2022. I mean, that's like unbelievable. And when I was first doing the research, 22 states allowed the practice. So,
Mhm.
and six only had partial bans. So, Alaska is one of them, where I'm going next week on a book tour. So, yeah, it's definitely not science fiction. That bad stuff is still going on out there. And, AIDS too in San Francisco is still a big factor in the community.
Well, New Jersey, because that's where I was born and raised, was having a back and forth about conversion therapy. I think it is now banned, but I remember when I'm not sure. It might not be officially banned. I think it is, but Chris
Let's hope
Christie,
so.
yeah, Chris Christie, I know was like going back and forth about banning it, and that's when he was governor. So, um, with Phil Murphy, uh, I'd assume it is banned. But I'm curious, where does that conversion therapy narrative in your book from, is it your own personal journey? Is it people like you've known who've gone through conversion therapy? It's such a heady topic.
Yeah, I mean, I was amazed that one of the reviewers seemed to think I was writing from personal experience, and I was like,
Mm.
yes, that's what the writer would hope for. Um, no, I don't have personal experience in it. So what I did was deep research. I mean, for 6 to 8 months, I didn't write anything at all. Practically, I was watching movies. I was looking at YouTube videos of these ex-gay preachers. I was, reading everything I could get my hands on. The Boy Erased, of course, was a kind of a big source, which is a great book. And there's a lot of scripture in that passage, and I'm not religious, and so I just required like very very deep research. I couldn't get in there today and write that or edit it. I would couldn't even touch it because I'm just not immersed in it like I was. Um, so I think that's I like writing from research, and so that was a kind of a and even though it's difficult, of course, it was a exciting time to be get so down in the weeds. And oddly enough, a lot of that scripture is I use most of the King James versions, and it's oddly beautiful. And even though some of it can be it's super troubling, but there's a lot of beautiful parts in the scriptures as well. And Kyle, the main character, wrestles with that, the kind of the horrible, twisted stuff they did to him, but also the beautiful stuff that he learned there as well.
So I did look 2013 New Jersey banned conversion therapy under Chris Christie. So I'll give Chris Christie his due. He did ban it. Um, they were the second state actually. So
Wow,
New Jersey's
fantastic.
usually ahead of the curve in a lot of things. They even have LGBT education right now in the curriculum. But of course, districts are now challenging New Jersey. Districts are now challenging the state because they don't
Hmm.
want the LGBT curriculum in
Right,
the more
right,
Republican suburbs. So
right.
right now, well, let's talk about it. Right now, we're in a time where there is a backlash. Um, and you grew up, in Dallas, and it's not the same Dallas as it is now. I mean, now Dallas, I
No,
know there is like a LGBT visibility. Even San Antonio, I visited there. There's an awareness, like a lot of the Texas cities.
yeah,
Everyone knows someone who's gay, really.
right.
Um, and like that could even extend into the suburbs and the rural areas. But again, it doesn't mean everyone's accepting. It just means there's more openness. So what do
You're
you
not
think is,
alone.
yeah, you're not alone, exactly.
Yeah.
So why do you think there is a backlash right now? Like, why is there challenges against teaching material that's LGBTQ? But then people will say, but I'm accepting of the community. I just don't want my children to learn about it.
Well, I'm certainly not an expert in this either, but I mean, I read the newspapers, so I could offer an opinion. But it seems like it's a kind of a callous way for I'm sorry, but it's to me, it's like a kind of a callous way for the Republicans to gather power or to keep power. They have become the party of grievance, and there's a lot of people out there. I mean, you and I, people like us, we love this new world, right? We love how diverse it is. We love how the mixture of cultures that we live in. Toronto is an incredibly diverse city, and I'm sure I don't know about where you are in Long Island, but certainly the New York area is even more so. But there's a lot of people out there that are threatened by that, and they don't like change, and they don't like where things are going, and I think that it's fear based, and the Republicans and the conservatives are capitalizing on that, and things go in cycles, right? And this is unfortunately the cycle we are in right now, that queer rights are under attack in a lot of people places, and especially for trans people.
So do you think that like even using your character Kyle as a case study,
Mhm.
and I know you don't have to be an expert, don't worry. Um, Lucian, I I'm curious though, because we're taken on Kyle's journey and this paradise that he finds in San Francisco, right? Like the community and just this awareness of feeling seen. Do you think, though, the other side of it, right? Like you've talked about the Republican um almost manipulating the people to really go against diverse opinions or diverse cultures. Like they're the scapegoats. Anyone who isn't, white and able-bodied and straight, like they're threatening to the fabric of America because, like you said, the culture and just the representation of cultures is so expansive now in America and keeps growing, which is so beautiful, in my opinion, like yours. How do you weigh in when it comes to, though, those who are feeling so empowered right now, who found their community, like who are fighting against, not even fighting against, but they're living their authentic lives, giving the middle finger to those who threaten their existence or want them to be silenced. Do you feel that there is, though, such a powerful swing in the other direction?
You're talking about swing to the left, or in trying to reassert the power and the validity of gay rights. Yeah, I do think that's happening. My cousin is a retired librarian, and she's real involved in this this movement now that there's these parents for, I don't know, parental rights they're calling it, and they're saying that they want to take out like everything from the library that has to do with anything gay. I'm really kind of expecting my book to be banned because, and there's not much sex in it, but it doesn't take much sex for these people to want to ban a book, does it? But anyway, she is real involved in this fight against these people, and like several of the bookstores there in Texas have sued the state because they passed this incredibly draconian law that would require the bookstores to read every single title that they have on their shelves and deem whether or not it's appropriate. And the bookstores are like, we don't have the manpower to do that. It's not our job. And so I think people are starting to fight back, and I think they're having some success. But that this fight seems to be coming a little bit late. The conservative forces have really been organized now for quite some time, and I think the voices of liberality are playing catch up at the moment, and I hope it finally starts paying off more and more.
Yeah, I hope so too. I mean, I have my own feelings about the Democrat Party right now, and a lot of them are not positive. So I'll keep them. Like, I feel that they're very confused, and that's not good. Like you've said, the Republicans, they've had this playbook ever since the Tea Party movement. I mean, you can go even further back. We could go back to when Anita, what was her name? She got a pie in the
Brian,
face. Anita
Brian,
Bryant. Yeah,
yeah,
Anita Bryant. And like they've always had this protect the children mantra
right,
against
right,
the LGBTQ community. Like this is not
right.
new to them. But I feel for the Democrats, they're so surprised that the Republicans are that organized or are able to, use legalities to actually make these draconian laws. Like, but they've elected power. So my hope is that the Democrats start to really unite, like create a collective stronghold. I hope there's a stronghold that starts happening instead of, my personal opinion, which everything is on the show, but um, unless I'm saying facts or statistics, but my personal opinion is the 24-hour news cycle has really watered down and made everything a breaking news headline when it's not a breaking news headline. That
Right.
instead of us focusing on these issues of taking away freedom of speech, which it is with literature, that's a freedom of speech issue to not have access. Maybe we shouldn't be debating, um, every single um, line that someone has said in the Republican debate, or what's the next most egregious thing that's happened um, with Democrat fighting. You know, I just think that they're feeding into sensationalized politics,
Mm,
and yeah, the sensationalism is what really bothers me because it harms the everyday people like you're talking about in your work.
hmm. Yeah, I just think the Democrats are one, they're afraid to poke the bear, right? Because there's a lot of these people are very angry, right, and threatening. They go to the city councils in terms of the book issue. They go to the city councils and take over, yell and scream, and it's so and but they're afraid to poke the bear. But I also think they're not as good at creating simple slogans. as the Republicans are, right? The Republicans can go make America great again, parental rights, and the Democrats are like, well, these issues are really complicated, and if you look at it one way, it's like this, and if you look, whoa, people don't really respond to that. They really respond to those simple slogans that rile them up. And so I think the Democrats have a little bit of a harder task at hand because they actually have to, you know, maintain some connection to truth and
Yeah.
reality.
Well, and that's why I was so privileged to interview Marianne Williamson because I had read her book about the power of love. And now she's running against Biden, but she's not getting a lot of airtime. But that's a whole other issue. Um, but why I bring her up is because she harnesses love. Like I do love what she says about using love as the spiritual force, as like if the Republicans are going to be hateful and they're being succeeding in using hate, why aren't the Democrats using love
Mm-hmm.
as their slogans? And like that is what will quench the fire of volatility. And people could have their um debates about her or her spirituality, but also at the end of the day, I think, I mean, even the LGBTQ community has like said maybe she like, downplayed the AIDS, um, like the AIDS actual virus, even though, she's donated food to those who have AIDS during the 80s, whatever. So people, again, are always going to pull apart, I think, anyone who runs for politics. It's not an easy job. I would not want to be scrutinized like that. But
Mm-hmm.
something that is beautiful is that message of harnessing love. Like it seems that that's something that's really connected to your work, even about how you're imagining the space of home. Like it is really Kyle, he's trying to find a place of safety. I mean, like what does home mean to you? It doesn't mean a place where you're trying to find acceptance and love.
Yeah, I think actually the title was suggested to me by my editor. I don't know about you, but I'm just terrible at titles, and um, but the more I started thinking about it, the more I started going, yeah, that is kind of what's happening here in this. Not only Kyle, but also his mom. His mom is desperately searching for who comes to live with him in San Francisco, def- desperately searching for a home and some place where she can be herself as well. So, um, and of course, Rachel, the sister, you just have to feel for her, because she's sort of cut loose by everyone. But she, I think, also finds a place for herself, which she, oddly enough, who would have thought, becomes a kind of a pulp fiction writer living in Fort Lauderdale. So everybody really in this book is searching for home, and this book is about trauma. It's about the effects of trauma, not only on Kyle but on the whole family and on his loved ones. And so, to me, trauma is kind of a loss of home, right? It's a loss of identity, loss of feeling of safety in your body and also in your mind, because they kind of did um, a number on Kyle mentally and emotionally, how feelings of lack of self worth and the depression that he deals with, but home also physically, just having a physical place. So he becomes an architect. He makes dream houses. He's working on this plan for this house that it's not really even a real project. It's just some fantasy that he's cooked up for what kind of ideal life he wants to have with an ideal lover. and then later he in Puerto Rico he actually builds a house with his best friend, but it was just also kind of a romantically described dream house on the beach in San Juan. Um, so what's tricky to write about trauma and this issue of home is that it can verge towards sentimentality and melodrama, and which I think this book kind of like edges up to the cliff of that, but it doesn't actually jump jump off. Emotion is really central to melodrama, and emotion is really central here in this book. Um, um, so, I mean, I don't know if you heard, then you read that New Yorker article in 2021 called "The Case Against the Trauma Plot." It caused a big kerfluffle when it first came out. I'm gonna massacre the writer's name. It's Parul Segal. I don't know if that's correct or not. Uh, but she sort of posited that the problem with the trauma plot was that you ended up with characters that were just merely symptom sets. They were, or conversely, they were cardboard cutout villains or wannabe saviors. And so that's kind of the issue that the problem is I was up with here. And personally, my solution was to not make Kyle the focus of the book.
Mm.
So the book has an unusual structure. It's made up of 6 different short stories, and each story has a different narrator or a different point of view. And so Kyle's point of view is really actually only in one of the stories, but this kind of takes the focus off of sort of the endless repetition of his depression and his feelings of lack of self-worth, his spiraling down, and puts it on the people around him also, and how are they dealing with it, and how are they dealing with the effects of the trauma. I thought that was a more interesting gamut, and it kind of uh, uh, address some of the issues that this writer, the New Yorker, was talking about. Another thing I did also to kind of take the focus off of the dark stuff is it's also a pretty funny book.
Yeah.
Uh, Even those first 2 sections that are about the initial sort of violence and the conversion therapy are actually pretty funny. They're written from the perspective in the voice of children, and they're kind of got a snarky, ironic, you know, wit. New York Times called them deliciously droll.
I
So
love that.
you know,
Well, and
I
these themes can, like you said, these themes can either go more in the especially home slogans, like there's no place like home, home is where the heart is, can really be those sentimentalized Hallmark movies, which I actually love, really cheery holiday winter
right.
movies. There's a fun thing to having hot cocoa and watching like a Hallmark movie during
Single
Christmas.
all the way, or what are those
Yeah, I
gay
know. And like they
Christmas
always,
movies?
I mean, or like the Family Stone, which isn't sentimental, but it's still like full of the family drama. There's like a reason why I think we all feel so nostalgic during the holidays to see family movies. Like they all are centered on families, really. But then you could have more of the comedic exploration of even when it comes to family trauma, like a Running with Scissors, which I think is one of the best um like zany comedic ways of telling the cutting um edge narrative of trauma. And Augustin Burroughs, I just think, does a really great job with that. But then you have But I'm a Cheerleader. I don't know if you've ever seen that
I've
movie.
seen it. Yeah,
Yes. So right, and they Mock with Natasha Lyonne. If
Yeah,
you haven't seen it out there, but you know who Natasha Lyonne. Now she's in so many shows, but she's great in that. And just the whole mock, RuPaul's in it, and the mocking of conversion therapy and making it like an SNL skit. It's so good. But right, you could go in either. It really can easily go into the what was that novel? So many of my friends, we read it um in the early 2000s. A boy, is it a boy called It? Yes, I think it's a boy
yeah,
called It. Remember that series? Okay. Like that is really gut-wrenching. I mean, um what the mom puts the son through. But then you really don't get to understand who the mom is. Again, I'm not excusing what she did to the son because it's really beyond the pale, traumatizing and abusive. But I see what you're saying. And you found this way. It reminds me of interviewing Celia Lasky, who wrote Under the Rainbow, which also takes that genre style of doing more short stories or vignettes through different characters from the narrative. And then it becomes this new novel. And I like that approach. I think it really works with her. It works with you, Lucian. And I wonder, it probably seems really freeing too, to not have to think of one psyche as the central protagonist, like just trying to follow Kyle's highs and lows. Like that's a lot of
yeah,
weight
yeah.
as a writer.
Well, for me, I kind of felt like I got to have my cake and eat it too, because I do feel like I'm a short story writer. I like that kind of unitary narrative arc. But I was sort of chafing at the constraints. I mean, obviously, the constraints are the chief the thing that makes the short story so
Mhm.
amazing, is how constrained they are. But also, I was sort of feeling like cheated almost. Like often you don't know who the people really are. They don't have families. You might not even know what they do for a living. They just exist in this microscope, that you could see in the frame of the microscope. And so this gave me the ability to still write short stories with the beginning, middle, and end, but at the service of a long story, and one that goes on for 40 years and that covers all these different people. And so I mean, it wasn't really my idea. I had to tell you, I thought I was going to be publishing a short story collection. And so I hooked up with a very fine Canadian writer here named Carolyn Anderson. And she suggested that I link my published stories. And I was like, what are you talking about? They are written 10 years apart, and but as I started thinking about it, I was like, wait a minute, there is kind of this implied arc to these stories. And so we worked to strengthen that over 9 months. And then I was very fortunate when John Metcalf, who is kind of the grand old man of Canadian letters up here, and took it on for Biblioasis, and he really wanted to make it a not kind of like feel like a novel. So
Mhm.
we spent another 9 months strengthening the connections and adding stories. And I was really worried that people were gonna go like, "What the heck is it?" It's is it a novel? Is it a linked short story collection? But and the publisher initially, I think, had a little bit of a, they're like that problem. And so at first they were calling it a novel on the cover, and so finally they just took that off, and they just decided not to call it anything at all, but Dreaming Home. And so far, the reviews have all been very positive. They've liked the form. They like the fact that, and readers that I talk to like the fact that they have to kind of fill in the blanks between
Yeah.
the stories themselves. And they feel, I was worried that they wouldn't be really engaged with the characters because they don't get to stay with them for very long, even though they characters do appear in multiple stories. but they all seem really engaged in the characters and have their favorites and fight over, who's the like, is Rachel evil or is she also, a victim? And same with the father. And so it's caused a lot of great discussions. And I think partially because it isn't all spelled out for you as the writer.
Well, and you're so right. I mean, I love all genres of literature. I mean, I've a PhD in English. Not everyone who has a PhD in English, I guess, could say they love every genre, which is their right to say that and have their preferences. I mean, I think a lot, ex- um, because I wrote on Whitman
Right.
closely for my dissertation. I'm such a queer poetry lover, and I think poetry is the genre that I found has the most detractors, or even those who are nervous to approach the form of poetry. Um, but I always say there's always a way into any genre. Like even when I teach poetry or I teach the short story, drama, novel, what have you. Um, it's always about what, what are you reading for? Like what is your process as that person in the solitude? What makes literature so special, in my opinion, is, you're the writer, then the private experience we each have with, say, dreaming home and how we're able to pull each story and organize it in our mind. Like maybe, we only read one story a day, but then it makes this arc and you have this connectedness to the whole narrative, which I think is so brilliantly done, Lucian, and was such a great idea by your publisher or colleague because, the short story A Rose for Emily, that's one of my favorite short stories by Faulkner. I think it's better than his novels. Is um, not really knowing why there's like a decomposed body in A Rose for Emily. Like there's all the mysteries and the unraveling, but then you're left uh aghast and just left up in the air. I mean, The Great Gatsby kind of works like that too. Novels can do it, and I think yours just does it in such a nice way. And do you remember there was that book in 2019 called Ducks Newburyport?
They're actually my publisher, Biblioasis, published it in North America. I have to say I did not. I read it only a little bit of it.
It's
It is a
intense.
real challenge.
Yeah, so for everyone out there, it's this book by Lucy Ellman that is one sentence for 1,000 pages, and it's all stream of consciousness. So think Ulysses on steroids. Well,
She's
and
apparently
actually,
a big fan of Joyce.
wait, you are or not?
No, she is.
Oh, she is.
That,
She is. I
yeah,
was going to
yeah.
say, I like Joyce's short stories. Talk about short stories. I recommend his there's one about the shops and the bazaar. I'm trying to remember what it's called, but there's like a marketplace story. And that one is really well done in my opinion. But when it comes to stream of consciousness, go to Mrs. Dalloway. My opinion. I think Virginia Woolf is just she
It's
really nails
true.
it. Um,
I have to say, I have been listening to this incredible audio version of Ulysses, but on the Naxos label, and this
ooh.
guy's made a career of narrating Joyce, and
Mm.
it's not, in the large it's not any more comprehensible, but beat by beat it's completely comprehensible. They're like people hanging out in bars and drinking, getting really drunk, and prostitutes, and the way he narrates it, it's also hysterically funny. So
It comes alive. Yeah, that's exciting.
I was
Yeah.
not prepared to, how engaging and funny Ulysses is, but if you read it on the page, I don't believe there's any punctuation, or I mean, it is tough, but this guy is named like Jim something, I can't remember last name, really does all that work for you. He's parsed it. So he lays out the sentences in a way that's really comprehensible. So I highly
Well, I'm gonna
recommend
get my
that.
hands on it
Yeah.
because I love audiobooks, and it's something that I think our culture now is really turning towards hearing the words a lot aloud and having that form and sense is exactly what storytelling is. It comes from the oral tradition. So I think that hearing Ulysses like that is really entrancing. Um, so
And this guy does all the. His name is Jim Norton. It's
Jim
on the
Norton.
Naxos audio, but and he does all the voices, right? So you can
Ooh,
keep. There's
okay.
like hundreds of characters in Ulysses, right? But you can keep them all straight because the voice he does all the voices, and
Well, that's like I always say to those who are nervous about Shakespeare and understanding. I say there's so many free performances on
mm-hmm.
YouTube or from your public library. You know, you could go to Audible, but if you have a public library in America, Libby, Libby is the free app for public libraries, and you can just like find all these audiobooks. And there's so many cast performances of, The Tempest or Romeo and Juliet, and it's wonderful to hear. I love to view it, but there's something about that isolating experience of even listening. Why people are listening to us right now. The podcast form and the capturing of the nuances of someone's speech pattern. It just
Mm-hmm.
really brings it alive. It's like how I would really recommend listening to Emily Wilson's new Odyssey translation by
Mm-hmm.
audiobook form. Especially when they were supposed to be done in the Homeric oral tradition of a
Mm-hmm.
storyteller. But okay.
That's gotten a
So
lot of.
yeah,
That translation's gotten a lot of buzz. I haven't looked at it yet.
yeah, but like maybe even listening to Ducks Newburyport, that's going to be all my homework. Is I'm going to maybe I'll have to interview Lucy Ellman. I will.
That
If it
would the
means I'll
fact
listen to the
that
audiobook version. Uh, I think
that
I could get through it.
all the sentences start with the fact that.
Well, and the hardest part in a stream of consciousness, like why it becomes more of a um almost an academic exam of deconstructing the novel is you have to really figure out where you're going to take breaks, and it's hard
Yeah.
because you don't have chapter breaks, you don't have
Right.
sections, it's just
Right.
going and going and going.
Right.
Actually I think Mrs. Dalloway has chapters.
Yeah,
um
it does. Yeah,
I know. Does Ulysses? I'm trying to remember.
yeah it does. Uh-huh. It's
Okay.
arranged because it's a apparently it tracks, the Homeric
The Odyssey.
legend. Yeah, the
Yeah,
Odyssey.
because
Yeah.
there's Penelope.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the wife section I've read a lot in my studies, which she gets like she's having so many erotic thoughts, and there's like
Right.
affairs and dalliances. I don't. Oh yeah, she's thinking about some guy's cock. It wouldn't be an Ivory Tower Boiler Room episode unless I said cock. Okay, so as we wrap up all of that, now we've added a lot of books, and I'm so glad you brought up the audiobook enriching experience. I am curious, is Dreaming Home available via audiobook?
Unfortunately, at this point, it isn't. I asked them if they were going to do it because I wanted to audition for it.
Oh, very
Because
good.
because I've had some theater training, and those first two chapters have got to be delivered in a Texas accent. So they said they were going to, but there's been no movement on that that I know of. So
Well, hopefully when this comes out, there's more momentum. So let's get that audiobook out there. Biblio Oasis.
yes.
Yeah, it really helps just have, the more formats, the more eyes and ears, right? So as we wrap up, I'm just curious with your work out there, you have this new hybrid genre approach of writing, which I think is wonderfully done, Lucian. You have so many complex themes from like AIDS activism, awareness, homelessness, even someone's coming out, their awakening as a person, experiencing trauma, but also being the one who inflicts pain and trying to figure out
Hmm.
the process of being the abuser, which we don't always see that side of the one who actually does the abusing reflect on that experience. Um, how does it feel to have such heavy topics, but yet, like you've said, you balance it with humor, you balance it with levity? What do you really want your readers to come away with all of such weighty matters that they're reading?
I mean, I hope it doesn't feel weighty when you're reading it. Like I said, there's a lot of humor in it. A lot of that humor is generated by these over outsized characters. All of them, most all of them are women. I had a lot of really strong women in my family, so it comes out in this form. So I think it's quite funny. It's quite engaging. It's even a bit of a page turner because you kind of like want to know what happens next. And what was the question?
Oh no, so what
What
do
I
you
want
want
them
your
to come
readers to
away?
come away with? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I think that this question of searching for home is an identity, is a lifelong endeavor. That we're always looking for that, and it's always shifting. And it doesn't have to be some big traumatic thing that causes a shift. It could just be change in circumstance, or you move to another city, you get another job, you have to get new friends all of a sudden, like I've done when I moved to Toronto. And that process is it can be difficult and challenging, but it's deeply enriching. And I think that's what we see at the end of the book. There's a kind of reconstituting of this family that had fallen apart is kind of reconstituted there on that concrete landing. And yeah, that's what we're doing all the time. So
And you hope that you've become more self-actualized, or even what you've learned from those changes. Like I even feel right now that I'm um being shaken up inside in really empowering ways because I'm not at the university, and I now am finding my own voice and my journey on my own. And it is full of obstacles, but it's also so beautifully empowering, Lucian. And I know that I'm coming out on the other side. I'm still the same person, but I've been deeply shaped, and I'm no longer I don't want to say passive. That's not the word. Uh, um, I'm not in my safe zone anymore. I'm,
mhm.
you know, not um what's the word? That, I'm not sorry, that was a rhetorical question to you, Lucian. That I'm not just resting on my laurels, right? I'm being challenged. I'm not just um allowing myself to, like, the family that you are exploring in your novel, or even your own life, Lucian. It sounds like you've never wanted to just play it safe. There you go. I knew I would find it eventually. So something so beautiful in that, even though it's fraught and full of discomfort, right? You're not just in the comfort zone, but some people, right, they want that security, but we do need these obstacles in our lives to grow and to move.
Absolutely. And you need them in fiction. And one of the things I'd say is that you'd like to feel that you're becoming actualized and stuff, but I'm old enough, to realize that a lot of the times you're just blundering through, and there's a kind of beauty in that. And I think that happens in the book. There at the end, Jason, Kyle's lover, and his sister are kind of blundering through, and what gets them through is each other.
Yeah.
Is they need the help of other people, and they need to connect. And even though they don't have the answers, and they kind of really are just as clueless as where they were before. They've reached out to each other in a way that I think is deeply hopeful. And I certainly still I could sometimes read that ending and still get all teary. So it still affects me, and I hope it will affect others when they read it.
Well, and it's so inspiring to even, have me reflect as I've been reading it, as I'm here with you on, like you said, you hope that you become self-actualized, but I like that philosophy you have about everyone out there is just trying to get by and they're, you know, um, floundering. Yeah, yeah. They're floundering through life, but you think that maybe some people um actually have a plan laid out in front of them. And some do have a plan, but it doesn't always go according to your plan. And now I've learned from your work to sometimes just let go of the need for everything to be, you know, point A to point D, point A. It is going to work out in the steps it will. Just throw yourself out there in terms of your voice and your passion. So, speaking of passion, this has been so wonderful, Lucian. I loved our conversation.
Me
Want,
too.
yes, I want everyone out there to get their hands on Dreaming Home. I have a link in the episode notes. Um, for where to buy it. I have Lucian's website. Um, I think you also have social media, so anywhere they can follow you, Lucian.
Sure, I'm on Twitter, Lucian Childs. I'm on Instagram. Um, uh, some form of Lucian Child. You can find me on my website. I'll have links to all those places. That's www.lucianchilds.com. So you can search for me on the web and you'll find me.
Wonderful. Well, Lucian, congratulations on your debut novel.
Thank you.
Excited for more people to get their hands on it. And it's been wonderful having you here in the Ivory Tower Boiler Room.
Thank you very much, Andrew.
Okay.
Best of
Bye,
luck to you.
Lucian.
Bye
Thank
bye.
you.